UVA President Jim Ryan resigns, and let's try to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. Chris Gray here, Augusta Free Press. I cannot explain this one. I got to be honest with you. Jim Ryan decided today, actually decided yesterday, we learned today, that he's decided to step down as a president of the University of Virginia in the face of what felt like, to me at least, token pressure from the Trump Department of Justice. So I'll explain all this here as we go through. Now, I will say that just 2 hours before the news broke, about 1:30-ish today, Friday, so I'm recording. It's about 4 o'clock now. I had hit publish on another story about this very topic. The story, though, from last night, reported by the New York Times, was that the Department of Justice was putting pressure on Jim Ryan to resign. My conclusion 2 hours before I ended up having to revisit this was he ain't going anywhere. My edit now is I'm not sure why he didn't hold out except for dot dot dot, and we'll get to that. We'll get to the except for. All right, so let's break this story down. It's been no secret that the UVA Board of Visitors, with a MAGA supermajority, I think it's 13-4 appointees of Glenn Youngkin versus the appointees held over from Ralph Northam, with and actually Northam has, excuse me, Youngkin has appointed four more people to replace those pending General Assembly approval. Um, it's no secret that that board had wanted to get rid of Jim Ryan before the end of this year, the calendar year. I've been writing about that for feels like about 9 months, since last fall. I struck up this really interesting sort of friendship with a guy named Bert Ellis, who's a billionaire, double who, I shouldn't say ex who, you're always a who, but a billionaire who's an ex-board member now. He was appointed by Glenn Youngkin, but then was removed by Glenn Youngkin earlier this year. But he was the one who first laid out the Get Ryan agenda to me. And I know strange bedfellows. Bert Ellis is a MAGA. I'm a liberal journo. But we bonded over our mutual distaste for the tenure of Carla Williams at UVA. So, and also football. Actually, we would back and forth text and email about football. And also our displeasure with that at UVA. Ellis made it clear in our conversations that Ryan, whose contract was extended in 2022 before the MAGAs started cycling on the board. That was the year that Youngkin took office. He won the election for governor in 2021, January 2022, is sworn into office and immediately starts trying to change the board over. That's what happens. It's the consequences of winning an election. It was clear the way Bert was telling me about all this that in his mind, Jim Ryan was a goner. The only question was how it was going to happen. As I'm starting to explain this, when I was writing about this starting last fall, it seemed to me there was plenty for that board to work with, even just as excuses rather than reasons necessarily. But the issues with leadership at UVA Health, which came to a head finally in February when the CEO there, Craig Kent, decided to resign under pressure. The failures on several fronts that led to the tragic shooting of three UVA football players in 2022. There was a lot there that we still don't know a lot about because UVA has categorically refused to make public the final report prepared by the Attorney General's office on that situation. So, but that it still seemed pretty ripe for at least criticism, if nothing else, of the administration, which is headed up by, well, was headed up by Jim Ryan. It turns out, though, that the leverage point was DEI. A pair of UVA alums in the Trump Department of Justice, Gregory Brown, whose title is Deputy Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, ironically, and Harmeet Dhillon, a civil rights lawyer in the department, a UVA law alum in her case. They were the ones leading the charge on the DEI front. I'm going to rehash here what I wrote earlier when I said Jim Ryan ain't leaving because I think it's pertinent. In essence, it seemed to me that the pressure from the DOJ folks on Ryan would seem to have been an attempt to make a case that Ryan could face termination, quote, with cause. I mean, I'm using kind of the legal term, not kind of, but it's a legal term, under the terms of his employment contract. I had FOIA'd his employment contract last fall when we were beginning to examine this issue and referred back to it today in a couple of important points. Specifically the exposure for termination with cause. At least as a case could be made, would be under clauses A and B under the termination header, which was point 6 in the contract. So clauses A and B would require a finding either of, quote, gross negligence or willful malfeasance by the president in the performance of his duties, which negligence or malfeasance causes substantial harm to the university. That's very vague, but still, it's potentially applicable. I think B is probably more to the case. Actions or omissions by the president that are undertaken or omitted knowingly and are criminal or fraudulent and involve dishonesty or moral turpitude. Okay, so you heard me kind of guffaw there a bit. The criminal part is questionable, but I don't know that the actions or omissions necessarily could be given what is alleged. The case for a finding under either A or B would begin with the Board of Visitors vote in March to dissolve UVA's DEI office to come into compliance with a Trump executive order that is of dubious constitutionality, if it's even dubious. But that case being, I mean, there's an executive order. It's not the law of the land. Hard to say there's criminality involved. The president can't write laws unilaterally. He needs Congress to write a law. He can sign it into law. But I mean, there's your kernel, right? All right. So the UVA Board of Visitors doesn't need anything to fire Ryan. They can fire Ryan without cause. We talk about this a lot in sports. You just fire the football coach if he doesn't win games. You could fire Jim Ryan just because you want to fire Jim Ryan. But then, but the other side of that is the contract spells out, at least in his case. Now, the football coach gets a better deal. So does Carla Williams. If the football coach, Tony Elliott or Carla Williams, the athletics director, gets fired, they actually get the full value of their contract all the way out to the end of it. In Elliott's case, that's April or May of 2020. I think it's April 30th of 2028. In Williams' case, she signed a 5-year extension this past December. They get everything they're owed until the end of it. In Jim Ryan's case, his contract spells out that he gets 12 months' salary, so a year. His base salary is $750,000. There's other monies in there too that I didn't necessarily include in this story, but he's eligible for performance bonuses. I doubt he'd be getting them from this Board of Visitors. There's also now very much he would be owed his sabbatical money, his vested sabbatical money. It'd be 6 months, which is equivalent to 6 months of salary, so another 375,000. So at least 1.125 million. Maybe some more wiggle room in there. There might be a little bit extra, but without cause, that's what he would be owed. Plus, he had the right, under the terms of the contract, to retain his tenured faculty status at the University of Virginia. So even if he's fired as president, he's still a professor there unless they buy him out of that too. And I didn't see anything in the contract that actually, spelled out what would happen if they wanted to buy him out. I would assume that would be something that would have to be negotiated. So it's hard to imagine, a school like UVA, which has a $14 billion endowment, letting $1 million keep them, keep the Board of Visitors from deciding to not fire a guy. Hey, we can't afford to do that. Um, but the reason wasn't money to not fire him without cause. It was the political and PR cost. And I'll kind of interject here now. The political and PR costs are already being explained. The first, I mean, within minutes of this news becoming public, 1:45-ish today, so it was around 2 o'clock. We got a joint statement from U.S. Senators Tim Kaine and Mark Warner. Here's their statement. I'll go ahead and read the whole thing. Virginia's economy and prosperity depend on the strength and integrity of our higher education system. It is outrageous that officials in the Trump Department of Justice demanded the Commonwealth's globally recognized university remove President Ryan, a strong leader who has served UVA honorably and moved the university forward over ridiculous culture war traps. Decisions about UVA's leadership belong solely to its Board of Visitors, in keeping with Virginia's well-established and respected system of higher education governments. This is a mistake that hurts Virginia's future. I mean, I'll go further and say it's an unmitigated disaster. It's a reputational hit that is going to be hard to recover from for the University of Virginia. I mean, everybody can remember, I'm sure, who's watching this or listening to this podcast can remember the hit that Harvard took and continues to take because it bended the knee to Donald Trump over DEI. Columbia University is another that did the same thing. Now UVA has done its turn on bended knee. Um, it's bad. This is not good. That's why I wrote earlier today that I imagine what was going on behind the scenes was that the Board of Visitors was using the UVA alums and the Justice Department to pressure Ryan to take a buyout. Basically saying, hey, we can fire you under either cause A or B or both with cause, and you'd be owed nothing. So instead of doing that, take a take a settlement. We'll give you the $1 million. We don't care. Just leave. Um, Sign an NDA so nobody disparages the other, and then we'll move on quietly to the next guy or gal, as the case may be, who the next president may be. I assumed though that because the New York Times had broken the story of the pressure, that kind of blew the scheme up. Okay, so I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm the only one, at least in print, who figured out that this was probably what was going on. But even so, it seems to me pretty obvious what was going on here. That's why I thought that Jim Ryan wasn't going anywhere because now the jig is up. It's out in public. As it turns out, Ryan apparently decided yesterday to step down. He informed the Board of Visitors, we're told, on Thursday that he intended to step down. I'm going to stick to my instincts on this and assume he's not leaving UVA without a parachute, probably a million plus. The issue for me as a UVA alum is I wish the $1 million payout was the extent of it in terms of the cost to the University of Virginia. This is a dark day in the history of UVA, no doubt about it.